What's going on, everyone? This is Chris, and today we're going to talk about how you're all going to get cancer and you're all going to die because you probably eat red meat. Just kidding. But the internet lost its collective mind over the last week when the World Health Organization released a report on its upcoming study that basically found that there was an increased association of risk for colorectal cancer with eating processed meat and red meat. So they classified processed meat as a group 1 carcinogen, which means that if you eat processed meat over an extended period of time, you have a very high risk of getting cancer. And red meat is a group 2 carcinogen, which means that if you eat red meat over an extended period of time, your chance of getting cancer is more likely. I want to emphasize a couple of different things here before we get into what I want to talk about, which is causal pathways by which consumption of processed and red meats can cause cancer. But let's emphasize a couple of things first. First, the study dealt with colorectal cancer. It did not deal with overall cancer. So we're specifically talking about cancer of the colon, intestinal cancer, or rectal cancer, which is cancer of the butt, for lack of a better term. Two, this was not a lab study. What this was an epidemiological meta-analysis. So what they did was they took studies from over the years, I think it was over 800, and they grouped together all the survey data, and that's how the data was collected. It was collected via surveys that people actually filled out, and then they grouped all this data together and they found specific trends. So let's get into this a little bit. Let's dig down. Let's talk about some of the causal pathways that could create an increased risk of cancer or could lead to cancer, because when we're talking about survey data, we don't necessarily have a cause there, we have an association. But let's talk about the potential causal pathways, and therein lies different solutions to the basic problem, which is the onset of colorectal cancer. So first thing is this. The first major pathway is through something called N-nitroso compounds. What are N-nitroso compounds? Basically what happens when you eat nitrates or nitrites, which are found in processed meat. That's how they become processed. You cure them, they create that delicious flavor that you find in bacon or sausage or salami, that salty flavor. When you consume those, and they are also in the presence of heme, which is found in hemoglobin. It's the red pigment from blood, which is why red meat is red. Then that can create N-nitroso compounds. Now, if you have enough N-nitroso compounds in the gut and they're there for a significant period of time, or you're eating them over a significant period of time, that can cause damage, which can damage the DNA structure of the intestinal cells in the lining of the intestine, and can create the onset of cancer. This causal pathway is through something called heterocyclic amines. Heterocyclic amines are basically what happens when you char meat. It's that charred, crunchy kind of thing you get from barbecuing or from eating well-done meat or eating really crunchy bacon. And so when you eat this over time, again, it can cause damage to the intestinal cells and lead to damage in the DNA structure, which in turn can lead to the onset of colorectal cancer. The next thing we want to consider is iron. Iron is actually really beneficial for athletes and can increase strength and endurance, but when it's not in its vegetable form, it's very loosely bound, right? In vegetables like spinach and other green cruciferous vegetables, iron is really tightly bound. So it doesn't basically collect in our intestinal tract if we're eating a lot of vegetables. But if we are eating red meat, the iron in red meat in the heme is very loosely bound, and so iron can collect in our intestinal tract, and just like a rusty nail, it can oxidize, and again, this can cause damage to the cells and lead to the onset of cancer. There's a compound known as carnitine in meat, and if you have supplemented for fat loss before, you've taken something like L-carnitine before, and when we eat carnitine, there's a specific bacteria in our gut that helps to digest carnitine molecules. And so when we eat a lot of meat and there's a lot of carnitine in there, this bad bacteria begins to thrive. And so it multiplies. And when it multiplies, it creates a compound, or when it feeds on the carnitine, it converts the carnitine into a compound called trimethyl N oxide. And again, trimethyl N oxide can cause damage to the cell lining of the gut, sound like a broken record, and lead to cancer. The biggest thing I want to emphasize to you here about each of these causal pathways is that they are associated with overeating meat, meaning you eat a lot of meat over an extended period of time. Now, what that means is that none of these factors actually cause cancer. They are associated with potential risks that can lead to the onset of cancer. Now, that might sound like a lot of fancy talk to you, but consider this. Carnitine is associated with increased fat loss and increased mobilization of fat into the bloodstream and can actually aid you for athletic purposes. A lot of you take L-carnitine supplements. Iron actually has a lot of benefits, and so does heme in creating greater strength and endurance in athletes. And so with each potential benefit, like with anything, if it's overused, it has a potential risk. So my advice for you here is to exude moderation. I myself eat between 4 and 6 ounces of meat a day, which is not a lot. Most of you eat a lot more than that. And I've been writing over the last few months about how you should decrease your protein consumption, because protein in general is associated with increased risk of overall cancer. And that's because of the increased flow of IGF-1 through the system, which in and of itself can lead to a higher risk of cancer. So take this for what it is and understand that anything can kill you, including water, if you overconsume it. So if you are going to eat meat, there's a few different things that you should be doing. First thing is this. 1, eat vegetables. Vegetables contain nitrosation inhibitors. Basically, these compounds prevent the formation of N-nitroso compounds, and they can prevent that damage that they cause to the gut lining. 2, avoid iron-rich supplements as much as possible, especially if you're a man. And that's because you do not menstruate and you do not bleed every month. As I said, iron can build up in the lining of the gut, which can cause cancer. Eat fermented foods as much as possible and supplement with probiotics. Ingesting really good bacteria and having really good microflora in your gut can battle those bacteria that convert carnitine into trimethyl N oxide, which can cause cancer and leave you in a world of hurt. So finally, I want to say this. The scientists themselves actually put out a press release today that really isn't getting much coverage by the media, saying that people completely misinterpreted their results. They were never saying that they didn't want people to eat meat or that people should not eat meat, and they never intended to classify meat as being the same thing as tobacco, which is, in their specific words, is never healthy. Meat consumed in moderation can actually benefit you, and if you want to eat meat and you want to continue eating meat, just be mindful of the things you should in order to keep a healthy body and in order to prevent the increased risk of colorectal cancer. Finally, there's going to be a shit ton of people with specific agendas getting out on YouTube and getting out on the media, whether that's to create sensation or to bring more credence to their cause, that are going to tell you that meat causes cancer. Meat does not cause cancer. Meat is associated, under specific circumstances, with a higher risk of the onset of colorectal cancer. All right? Talk to you all soon. If you've got questions for me, hit me up at gettingshredded@gmail.com, or you can check out other great content on my site at www.chrisalbertfitness.com.